The record is broken every year for most international players in the NBA, and it isn't stopping anytime soon. More and more talent has been coming from every corner in the globe, showcasing their skills for the game. Even though this trend has really been on the rise and in the spotlight in recent years with the rise of MVP candidates like Jokic, Luka, Giannis, and more, international players have been around for decades, such as Hakeem, Manu, Gasol, Dirk, and so on. While the domestic timeline of basketball has been studied and discussed at length, even by me, the international game is more of a phenomenon that doesn't get as much documentation. A friend of the channel, Swiss Eel, has done a few videos discussing this massive wave of international players. But with me already discussing the Basketball Olympics and dynamic/progression there, it's time for me to throw my hat in the ring and dive into how this simple ball and hoop game traveled 24,000 miles to everywhere on the globe. Much like my most competitive video that was a massive amount of mathematical data, this video was a lot of work including geographical data, political influences of the time periods covered, and overall history and research covering over 200 countries and sub-territories. So, if you want to skip the narrative and specifics of the timeline, there will also be a time-lapse map at the end you can skip to. But if you really want all of the details that I put a lot of work into, I encourage you to watch the full video. And again, if you did learn anything, or you found this video entertaining, please like, subscribe, share the video around, all that good stuff, as it does help support me and all the effort that went into this. But anyway, let's get into it. To first discuss the timeline internationally, let's rewind all the way back to humble beginnings. I promise I'm not going to repeat my domestic timeline, but the details of how things started are important here. Many of you may know that James Naismith created basketball at a YMCA in Springfield, Massachusetts, leading to the Hall of Fame being built there to honor him. However, that specific YMCA was none other than the International YMCA Training School in Springfield, Massachusetts, now known as Springfield College. On top of that, James Naismith himself, again as many of you may know, is Canadian, meaning even in the conception of the game, it was already burrowing its roots to spread across borders. Of course, Canada would be the first international country to pick up the game. Again, this wasn't much of a surprise considering Naismith himself was in fact Canadian, and that the game was first played and created in Massachusetts, which is only 300 miles from Montreal. To put that in perspective, that's like basketball moving from LA to Vegas. Not to play the whole Texas is big card, but it's nearly 100 more miles just to go from San Antonio to Lubbock. Let's backtrack to the YMCA though. To quote the Springfield College website themselves, again previously the YMCA to clear up any confusion, they state a few of the YMCA and college values as the following. With a deep commitment to advancing equity, Springfield College is the first institution of higher education in the country to join the WISE Diversity, Inclusion, and Global Innovation Network, integrating a DIG lens in the fabric of our programs and services ensures that everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential with dignity. Furthermore, our partnership is so strong that it's here, on our campus, that the National YMCA Hall of Fame calls home. We are honored to honor our Y heroes who were the visionaries and pioneers moving the Y forward in strengthening communities, nationally and internationally. They continue stating that even in 1891, the first year of the game, that, quote, word of the new game spread like wildfire. It was an instant success. A few weeks after the game was invented, students introduced the game at their own YMCAs. The rules were printed in a college magazine, which was mailed to YMCAs across the country. Because of the college's well-represented international student body, the game of basketball was introduced to many foreign nations in a relatively short period of time. With that, being invented at a YMCA with this atmosphere truly was the most optimal outcome. Just as stated, the game was already spreading like crazy in just its first few years. Nearly 30 years before basketball even came to be, in 1856, the nation's first known English as a second language class was held for German immigrants at the Cincinnati YMCA. YMCAs were also very popular near railroads and brought in railroad employees. In the 1800s and early 1900s, many railroad workers were immigrants looking for work, leading to San Francisco YMCAs serving Asian communities established in 1875 to serve the city's expanding Chinese population and other railroad immigrants. Going back to 1891 when the game was made, French members actually made up most of the YMCA outside of the US and Canada. The France YMCA was founded all the way in 1852, less than a decade after the very first YMCA ever was made, and it continued to make up a vast percentages of the members in the US. And so, less than 2 years after the first basketball game ever, in 1893, the first international basketball game outside of Canada and the US took place in Paris, France at a local YMCA. It didn't take long for the game to hop the English Channel as well, with England adopting the game in 1894, as well again in another YMCA. Another Canadian along with Naismith, T. Duncan Patton, also brought the game to India in 1893 to 1894, but it wouldn't be a huge sport until much later. At the same time as the French game was picking up, Bob Gailey went to Tianjin, China. Shortly after, in 1895, Chinese and other Asian members of the YMCAs previously mentioned started to pick up the game even further. While many believe that Mayans and Incas played a predecessor to basketball far prior to Naismith, basketball then started to move south and was introduced to Brazil by Professor Augusto Schall in 1896. From there, it moved to more Latin American and South American countries. However, it was a much smaller sport due to infrastructure limitations. From TalkBasket.net, they write, quote, "The environments surrounding basketball courts in South America are not as well conditioned as it is in the rest of the Americas. Latin basketball is more of a street version than many US players are used to. Courts can be transformed from coffee bean drying areas during the day to a vibrant, bustling court with a random match in the evening." In 1896, this same year as well, Ernest Herman showed the game to his father, August Herman, who took it to Germany in hopes to boost physical education among the women, a trend that will actually help surge the game in other countries as well, and we will see to be a cornerstone of its expansion. Around this time, it also made its way to Germany's neighbor, Belgium, again through YMCA. This later bled over to Luxembourg from France and Belgium as well. According to other sources, a year later, quote, "The first basketball game in Australia was between the Our Boys Institute and, once again, YMCA in 1897. The first recorded game, however, was played in 1905 at the YMCA in Melbourne. Then it spread to Victoria and Adelaide before sweeping across the nation. Without a very specific year, reports say that, quote, "Men's Sana Athletic Club of Siena is credited with first playing basketball in Italy in the late 1890s. However, conflicting reports claim that the sport came over much later in 1907. At the turn of the century as well, just as the game hopped from France to the island of England, the game moved from China and the rest of Asia to the island of Japan in 1900 with the help of Genzaburo Ishikawa. By this point, these were all mainly pickup games, which is why the game moving to other countries still wasn't as big of a deal or big of a news story. However, in a shocking turn of events, the YMCA actually started to ban basketball and slow its progress down. To quote Britannica, "While basketball helped swell the membership of YMCAs because of the availability of their gyms, within 5 years the game was outlawed by various associations because the gyms that had once been occupied by classes of 50 or 60 members were now being monopolized by only 10 to 18 players. The banishment of the game induced many members to terminate their YMCA memberships and to hire halls to play the game, thus paving the way to the professionalism of the sport. With this move to more formal and designated courts, the game started to grow larger due to its new organized style, especially domestically, leading to more colleges picking up the game. Again, I promise not to repeat my domestic timeline, but I bring this up because it wouldn't be until 1906 when UT picked up basketball, and the early 1900s when it started to spread across the rest of the country into other West Coast universities all the way in California, marking the game's integration in all of the United States, a decade after the game was already being played in 8 different countries, including the US and Canada already. This technically meant that the game was already far more international than it was domestic, a trend that we would actually see continue later. As the United States became more involved in Asia politically, basketball found new grounds to flourish. In 1902, during the insular government of the Philippine Islands, the game spread to, of course, the Philippines, where it quickly became a beloved sport. Around the same time, C. Herrick introduced basketball to Persia, now modern-day Iran, planting the seeds for the game's growth in the Middle East. Afterwards, the game continued to spread even further across Latin America and into Mexico, again due in large part to YMCA themselves expanding, but again it was still played at a much smaller capacity. In 1904, a massive boost happened with basketball being added as a demonstration sport in the St. Louis Olympics, putting it on display for all countries present. While this further expanded the game in countries previously mentioned like Australia, UK, France, Germany, and so on, this is when many other countries were first introduced to the game. While the countries picked up the game in much larger quantities later, for the sake of clarity, this meant that the game was introduced to Cuba, Austria, Greece, Hungary, Norway, South Africa, Switzerland, and Newfoundland. The geopolitical climate of the time and different territory lines meant that the game also technically reached modern-day Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, Romania, Poland, Ukraine, and parts of Palestine through the Ottoman Empire. Simultaneously, Turkey would be introduced to the game in 1904 at Robert College by an American teacher as well. However, the specific teacher is not disclosed. Just 2 years later, in 1906, the game got much larger in Cuba, once again due to US involvement there, much like the Philippines. Around this 1906 or early 1900s, Russia was also being introduced to basketball, once again due to the YMCAs being established there. As a result of the old territories once again, this meant that Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan were also introduced in some capacity. However, much of these countries would see more expansion in later years, especially after they won independence, which we'll discuss as it happens. In 1907, there were more official records of Italy playing basketball as well, as previously stated. Around 1908, New Zealand was introduced through YMCA again by J.H. Greenwood, followed by Sweden around 1908, again through YMCA. Through the 2010s, basketball spread further to Uruguay, particularly the capital of Montevideo, before forming official leagues in 1920. YMCA continued to expand across several more countries, leading to basketball being introduced in Argentina in 1912 and more Latin American countries. Around the same time in 1912 to 1915, the United States was getting more involved in Central America and the Caribbean, leading to basketball being played with U.S. occupants in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Nicaragua, as well as these listed islands. Previously mentioned Slovenia also saw an increase in basketball around 1914 after modifying rules of a previous game played there called korfball. Going into the World Wars, many more countries were introduced to the game due to the scale of participants in the war and Allied involvement in other territories. Ireland, for example, picked up the game around 1917, when, quote, it surfaced in Ireland as an attempt to broaden the physical exercise routines of military units stationed in Derry in the early 1920s. However, because of the war, many of these countries were obviously focused on rebuilding or focused on the changing world, so they did not start playing at a larger level until much later. The small exceptions to this were the game progressing to Egypt through YMCA in 1917, and South America to Chile in 1918, and Bahrain and Kuwait showing basketball activity around 1914, once again with World War I involvement. Similarly to Slovenia being influenced by korfball, Germans were fascinated with netball, a variation of basketball very popular amongst women, and it took it to Lithuania in 1919. The women in Lithuania helped expedite the popularity of netball and, therefore, basketball in the country, especially post-World War II. Finland and the Netherlands were introduced to the game around the 1920s through YMCA as well, and more bleed over from other countries started happening more and more throughout World War I in the 1920s, with Walter Kamek introducing the game to Sri Lanka through YMCA, Switzerland introducing it to Liechtenstein, and Sweden and Finland introducing basketball to the Åland Islands, and it further being promoted by local sports clubs and schools. The Netherlands also started to bring the game to Greenland. However, due to the harsh winters in Greenland, the game was never really popularized, even today, as opposed to football and other sports. Spain was also introduced to the game through Cuba from a priest named Eusenio Milan in 1921. Lebanon also started to pick up the game with the influence of the American University of Beirut. YMCA only continued to further expand it to other countries, including Trinidad and Tobago, South Korea, Jamaica, and Iceland in 1928, and throughout the rest of Greenland, which brought it to the Faroe Islands as well. Following the war, the world was full of politics and cultural movement. One economic tool also stood above the rest: oil. Oil was what made the world run, and every country was pining over it, and it led to a huge expansion of sports, including basketball. Even at home in America, the McPherson Globe Refiners were seen as the most popular and talented team. On an international level, it caused a cascade of countries to have America, Russia, and other superpowers dip their toes into their countries. Colombia signed the 1921 Eurasia-Thompson Treaty, inviting American oil companies into the country, introducing the game. Bulgaria was influenced by the YMCA, but also had other diplomats in the country at the time, further accelerating its progression. Malta saw British activity which introduced the game, and it spiderwebbed throughout the country through schools and amateur clubs. In Peru, President Augusto B. Leguía invited America in, much like Colombia, leading to cultural overlap, including basketball and more infrastructure. Azerbaijan saw Russian oil workers move into their country, bringing sports and other influences as well. President Lázaro Cárdenas in Mexico also campaigned for more infrastructure in the country, leading to more sports being played, including basketball, and more Latin American countries started to follow suit. Basketball was also once again a demonstration sport in 1924 Olympics, partnering with the YMCA. This further spread the game to previous countries covered, but also displayed it to some countries for the first time, like Monaco and Portugal, although these countries would show a larger influence later, such as US students playing in Portugal in 1927. Going into the 1930s is when the game really started to show. Oil continued to be a pulling force for many countries to get infrastructure and influence from others, as well as other industries like bananas and coffee, which is a whole other topic in itself. You can check out Salmonella or Wendigoon for more info on the banana coups.
In fact, the national debt of Honduras got so bad that the government ended up not being able to perform a lot of its functions. So in response, the three fruit companies stepped in and said, "No worries, we got this," and decided to basically build the nation's infrastructure for them, including roads, railways, shipping lines, telegraphs, telephone lines, radio towers. They even switched the whole country off to the US dollar. Keep in mind, this wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts. It was mostly just to make their own businesses function more efficiently. But it was helpful either way. Anyway, now, not only did they have total power over their plantations, but also a monopoly over nearly every major industry in the country. Many other Central American nations soon followed this pattern, creating a corrupt sort of symbiosis whereby the fruit companies get huge tax breaks and land grants in exchange for a modernized infrastructure and payoffs to the rich minority. And so, the banana republics were born.
In any case, oil, bananas, and coffee led to America spreading the game to Venezuela, Paraguay, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, as well as further expansion in the Dominican Republic and Jamaica. The game also spread to Bolivia through oil in 1937. With more infrastructure being built with the help and influence of America and Mexico, the game spread throughout the rest of Latin America and Central America, as well as in the 1930s. With America moving into southern countries and following World War I, France, Germany, and England all began looking after their colonies and territories as well. This spread the game all across Africa and the rest of Europe, such as Indonesia through the Dutch, and Malaysia and Singapore through the British, Taiwan through China, and so on. This only further spread the game through Europe and Asia, with Maccabi Tel Aviv Basketball Club in 1932 and Israel's first recorded game in 1935, and the rest of the Balkan states in Europe such as Albania and more of Romania. America further spread the game to Thailand, Rwanda, and Syria through military involvement and missionaries, as well as Puerto Rico, where the first official game was played on February 11, 1930, where Floral Park defeated the Army 56-7. The sport was gaining so much popularity worldwide that official leagues and clubs were finally starting to be established. The French Basketball Federation was established in 1932, Malina Industrial and Commercial Athletic Association was established in 1938 for the Philippines, Lithuanian Basketball League was established in 1937, the Spanish Basketball Federation was founded in 1923, Italian Basketball Federation 1921, Morocco Basketball Federation 1936, Palestine had Palestine Sports Federation reinstated, and Hellenic Basketball Federation was founded in 1932 for Greece. The biggest event for international basketball in the 1930s, though, was the introduction of FIBA. In 1932, Argentina, Czechoslovakia, Greece, Italy, Latvia, Portugal, Romania, and Switzerland came together and formed the league. With the NBA not coming till over a decade later, this finally gave an option for many European countries to finally form professional leagues and show off their skills, which further demonstrated the game and influenced the spread. And more leagues started popping up everywhere. However, again, with the NBA not being formed and this still being the only league, this meant that FIBA essentially was the authority on basketball. And in September 1934, the Protocol of Stockholm was passed, and FIBA became the only recognized authority responsible for basketball. Again, this further established that basketball was more of an international sport at this point before national, as the NBA again would not be formed until 1949. Shortly later, starting in 1937, a group similar to the YMCA formed as well. The group known as the Mormon Yankees began in Australia and started passing the game to all of the Oceania islands, including Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu, Tuvalu, Nauru, Somalian Islands, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Palau between 1937 and 1961. Going into World War II, the Cold War, and beyond, the expansion of basketball can mostly be summed up by the colonization, decolonization, and missionaries of other countries. So for these next few countries, I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet, especially since I've been talking for over 20 to 30 minutes by this point. Sadia School in Muscat was a prominent place for basketball for Oman, and Yugoslavia influenced the game in North Macedonia. During World War II, America brought basketball to Ecuador, Guam, Bermuda, Guadeloupe. For the rest of the 1940s, America and the YMCA brought basketball to Pakistan and Bangladesh. To further display the influence internationally, Italian-born Canadian Henry Biasati suited up for the Toronto Huskies in 1946 as the first international player in the NBA, at that time the BAA. Through the 50s, America and YMCA further introduced it to Nepal, Jordan, Liberia, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Ghana, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Suriname. Meanwhile, through the midst of the Vietnam War, further interactions in colonies, and the communist fight, the France introduced the game to Vietnam, Monaco, Laos, Cambodia, Madagascar, Sudan, Tunisia, Benin, Gambia, Guinea, Niger, Chad, Ivory Coast, Mali, and Senegal. The Germans also managed to introduce it to Burundi, while the Italians to San Marino, and the Portuguese to Angola, and the British to Myanmar. At the same time, Walid Sambadne became, quote, the father of Nigerian basketball in 1950 by introducing the game to them. In 1960s, the trend continued with America and the YMCA introducing the game to Guyana, Ethiopia, Somalia, Libya, Bahamas, as well as further expanding it in the Bahamas and the Caribbean, and St. Lucia. In the meantime, Britain and the UK introduced it to Zambia, Lesotho, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Uganda, and these other countries. Germany brought the game to Cameroon, while France brought it to Djibouti, Libya, Algeria, CAR, and Togo, as well as the Western Sahara and Andorra with the help of Spain, which also brought it to Equatorial Guinea. Portugal also played a part, bringing it to Mozambique, Cape Verde, and Sao Tome and Principe. Norway, Australia, and South Africa also spread the game to Svalbard and Jan Mayen, Papua New Guinea, and Namibia, respectively. Mongolia had its fair share of Soviet and Chinese influence by being its neighbors and also got a taste of basketball around this time. Many other countries that had previously had amateur basketball started to play a lot more and establish official clubs around this time, such as Egypt, Rwanda, and the Dominican Republic of the Congo. Following the 60s, there was more independent movement to spread it to the last remaining pieces around the world, like Terry Bennett bringing it to the British Virgin Islands in 1967. King Jingmei Singh Wanchuk was actually a massive basketball fan on his own, much like Cuba was to baseball during the Cold War. It made it a country priority to spread the sport throughout schools and physical education programs throughout Bhutan in the late 70s to early 1980s. Further down the line, the game only continued as more international players started growing their talents and entering the NBA, leading to more to be inspired and training themselves to enter the NBA. In 2000, the EuroLeague was formed, and a year later, the NBA also founded Basketball Without Borders to bring basketball and hospitality even further across the world, and Dennis Rodman even traveled to North Korea in 2010 to further expand the game there. Legends started to pop up more and more, such as Hakeem from Nigeria in 1984, Mutombo from the Dominican Republic of the Congo in 1991, Gasol in 2002, Dirk from Germany, Manu Ginobili, and of course more recently Giannis, Luka, Jokic, and more. So now that the timeline has been established for each country, you might be wondering, if the growth of the game was so massive, why is it that the graph of international players doesn't look like this, but instead looks much more like this? After all, the first NBA international player dates all the way back to 1946, again like we said, with Italian-born Canadian Henry Biasotti suiting up for the Toronto Huskies. Well, considering that I've already been talking 20 to 30 minutes or however long this video is, I'll keep it a bit short and maybe dive into it in another video. But since that's what most of you are probably still here for, I'll say it anyway. The simple answer is the internet. The part of hustle where Bo Cruz starts to get popular and drafted simply off of Instagram Reels isn't that far off from reality. More scouts are using digital tools to find talent in further areas across the globe, and they're traveling further abroad to witness it in action. The internet is also giving access of the game to more people. While basketball before was spread through immigrants and the military mainly through demonstration or word of mouth, now people can search on YouTube for highlights or watch a game through Hulu. SportsDab reports, the NBA's global scouting system and various basketball academies have facilitated the identification and development of talent from different corners of the world. Today, the league boasts a diverse roster of international players representing more than 40 countries, enhancing its international appeal and fostering a sense of inclusivity. According to Sportskeeda, one of the biggest reasons for the rise of international players in the NBA is the globalization of basketball. The sport has become more popular around the world, and with that increased popularity comes increased talent. More and more young players are picking up a basketball and dreaming of playing professionally, no matter where they're from. Another reason for the rise of international players is the NBA's scouting efforts. The league has been actively seeking out talent from around the world, holding camps and showcases in Europe, Asia, Africa, and other regions. This has allowed the NBA to discover talented players who might not have otherwise been noticed. ProConnect Basketball continues this with, quote, "The rise of international players in the NBA can be contributed to various factors. Firstly, the increasing globalization of basketball has led to a more interconnected world, allowing players to gain exposure to different playing styles and techniques from an early age. Furthermore, the NBA's effort in scouting talent globally and creating partnerships with international leagues has created a pathway for talented players to showcase their skills on a global stage. The success stories of international players like Dirk Nowitzki, Yao Ming, and Manu Ginobili have inspired young players worldwide, fueling their dreams of playing in the NBA. The NBA has only been pushing for more of this expansion because, as a business, the more corners of the globe you're in, the more money you make. And the NBA has since reportedly invested over $10 billion into the Chinese basketball market. As a result, a chicken and egg situation begins to form. Much like diversity in any company, with such a mix of nationalities, ethnicities, and race, there brings diversities in culture, thought, ideas, and more. In the NBA's case, that means different skills, methods, techniques, fundamentals, and more. While America was introducing its basketball rules to the world is now returning the favor and introducing its rules to the NBA. Manu with the Eurostep, Dirk's one-legged fadeaway, Hakeem's shake, Arvydas, Sabonis, and Jokic passing, as well as players as a whole spacing the floor and other fundamentals. With these changes in the game, scouts have been looking for more international players that can keep up with this new international style that's integrating itself in the NBA, and further creating more influence in a cycle fashion. Basketball Universe writes, international players have significantly impacted the NBA by enhancing the league's competitive level, increasing its global reach, and creating richer cultural diversity. The infusion of talent from different countries has resulted in a more innovative and refined style of play, raising the bar for all teams. The infusion of international talent is evident in the annual NBA draft, where players from around the globe hope to hear their name called by the league's commissioner. This influx of international rookies creates a diverse and balanced atmosphere in the league, paving the way for new playing styles, mindsets, and innovations to emerge within the game. Sportskeeda continues saying, the impact of international players on the NBA has been significant. Not only do they bring a different style of play to the league, but they also bring a different perspective. International players often have a different basketball background and approach to the game, which can lead to new ideas and strategies. Hoopshead closes for this video, stating, the European emphasis on ball movement, shooting, and spacing has become increasingly prevalent. Dirk Nowitzki, for example, revolutionized the power forward position with his shooting ability, forcing a reevaluation of traditional basketball rules and strategies. Similarly, Yao Ming's presence bridged the gap between Eastern and Western basketball cultures, bringing the game to millions of fans in Asia. So even with the game in every corner of the globe, social media and technology as well as other modernizations grew the international game in the NBA. But that doesn't give an excuse to discount any of the other progress that's been done in other countries around the world. Once again, this video was a lot of research and effort, if you can imagine. So if you stuck around for all this time, then I can only imagine it's because you enjoyed it, or at least learned something. So please drop a like and subscribe, share the video around as it does help me, and let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts or things to add. Thank you guys so much for supporting me. We're almost on 10k subscribers, and I really want to hit 15k by the end of the year. So with all that said, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out.
This is not okay. This needs to stop now.